So today's topic will be PCF tips and tricks all around the development process through testing, designing, debugging, and stuff like that. So we can start. So first of all, who am I request, as I always start. I'm a software developer coming from Zagreb, Croatia. I'm Microsoft Business MVP and working for a consultancy called Spun. I'm mostly programming stuff around biz apps for last 5 years. So I'm not that much experienced as maybe other speakers in this space, but at least I try to do my best. You can contact me on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can see them on screen right now, or you can check my blog, dynamicsninja.blog, and read some articles around development in Power Platform. Let's start first with the tools you need for developing your PCFs. Most of you guys, if you tried to develop a PCF control, know that you need to have Node.js, NPM as a first prerequisite, and you can use any IDE that you want, but most preferable out there around developers is Visual Studio Code because it has integrated terminal and all the fancy stuff that you need in modern web development. But those are the tools that are really needed. But of course, in community, there's always tools created from community to help you to be more efficient while developing your controls. Okay, let's start with first one. So it's a PCF builder for XRM Toolbox. That's the first tool related to PCFs around. It's a visual tool for beginners because you can see all the commands that need to be executed in command prompt directly in your interface. You just press the button, execute that command. You don't need to know the syntax. Just press the button, input some fields, and you can create solution, run tests, open harness, and stuff like that. It's very useful for people who are just starting the development of the PCF controls. The second one is probably a clone of the PCF builder for XRM Toolbox. It's now just translated to the Visual Studio Code. So now you have all that power directly in your Visual Studio Code. You don't need to know syntax, just press Ctrl-Shift-P and search for the command you want to execute. The Visual Studio Code will pop up some prompts, you answer the questions there, and boom, you have the command executed and you don't need to know the syntax. Right now, it has some more features like IntelliSense, snippets for PCF development. That's really cool. And the last one is my tool called PCF Generator. And what is that? That's basically Yeoman Generator plugin. Yeoman Generator is a tool that allows you to create templating engines for scaffolding your projects for various reasons. I created a tool that will.
So is that hamstwo?
Sorry, Thomas. Okay, I hope that was accidental. So you can easily scaffold your project directly from the console line, but the niche included my tool in his PCF builder, so you can now execute those commands even more easier. It will create, for example, CSS files, regex files for translations, preview images, all the folder structure that you need for your tool. And you can do some, for example, README generation from the manifest file and stuff like that. It has a few features that are really cool. I will show you that in a bit. Second one, make your tools intuitive, because people will always ask themselves, how do I use it? If you don't describe your control, people will just have question marks above their heads, and they will not use it, or just don't know how to will not know how to use it. You need to spend some time on your manifest file. That's the first thing that you need to do when you're creating a control. Open the manifest file and input some data there. You can edit data on a control and properties, and make them user friendly. So each description that is there populated, because you will thank yourself later, because maybe you will create a documentation out of your uh, manifest file, or your user would, I can do it that way, because you described what they need to input in their properties there. Of course, complex controls require documentation. If you need to pass some large JSONs or XML files there, make documentation for those kind of tasks too, because I saw few controls that are doing really cool stuff, but they don't have any documentation, and it's really hard to make it work on the first time. Describe what's really important. Don't use long sentences, just the important information about the properties or controls. Here are the examples of the control that is just out of the box without any customization. For example, property display key, fancy text control without spaces. You should not do that. You need to add it, the manifest file, make it user friendly, so the user, when he sees your control, he knows what it does and stuff like that. Here's the example of the how you should really do it. Okay. Third one is preview image. Why is preview image important? Because most of the controls don't have preview images, and people are visual types. I personally would choose a control based on the picture. If I see, oh wow, I didn't know that that control is doing some work, something, just from the title, I can see on the image that it's doing something useful, or it has rich user experience. So I would choose that control straight away. Here, what you need to have in mind is that you need to keep the aspect ratio. So here are the dimensions, width and height. So 170, 130 pixels. So the ratio is 17:30. You should keep that ratio, because if you don't, your image will just stretch, like you can see on the GIF on your right. So keep that in mind, because it is not so good if your image is stretched. Maybe the UI elements are not visible or clear in that way. So keep that in mind when creating your preview image control. It's easy to include it. Just add preview image to your control node, put a path to the image, and you're good to go. You don't need to include the preview image to your resources node in the manifest file, like I saw on the few controls. So just don't duplicate your code. You just don't need to include it there. So that's for the preview image. So localization. I think that 90%, even more, controls don't have localization. And why is that so? I don't know. Maybe people are just making that control for themselves and they don't want to share it around. But if you localize your control, you will have broader audience. You can make people add just a translation file to your control and contribute to your control that way, because I obviously can't translate control to any other language than English and Croatian, because I don't know any other languages. But people that know German, French, Italian, can translate it for me, add that translation file, and it will be in their native language. What do we need for localization? We need localization files called regex files that need to have language code IDs. So the program or our PCF control knows how to identify which language to use. And how do we know LCIDs of all that those languages? Yeah, that's hard. You can find it online, but when you're using PCF Builder for Visual Studio Code, you can easily create a regex file, but by not knowing the LCIDs, because you will just type in English and he will find the English LCID and populate it for you. Think about your end users. That's the main part here, because maybe some people don't use the system on English. They want to use it in their language. They don't know English. Think about your users. So localization is really important. On the right, you can see how it looks like. It looks scary at first, but at the end, it's only an XML files with few relevant nodes that you need to edit to make it work. You can localize two levels on the PCF control. One is configuration level, and the second one is control UI. So configuration level localization is made only for the configuration in your Form Explorer, for example. When you open the Form Explorer, want to configure a control, you can see that translations there. But the important thing here is that configuration is only visible in the language that of the organization. If you provisioned an English organization, you can only customize the system in English. You will only see English values there. But in control UI, you can make your control translate to any user settings language. So if I change language, if there is a regex file for that language, your control will know how to translate itself to that language. So language codes are the big part here. LCIDs, you can find it on the internet, but if you are using the PCF Builder tool, it will handle that for you. Think ahead, because if you include it early in your project, you will just need to create another file for localization and you're good to go. That's the whole point. If you create all the infrastructure for the translations at first, you will definitely make yourself life easier when it comes to refactoring and stuff like that. Okay, let's just do a quick skip to the demo part, just to show you a few things that I talked about here. Okay, so the first thing is the manifest. So these are the key parts here. So display name, description name, and stuff like that. You can define values that you want to use here, or you can add keys that you will include in your regex files for translations. And those values will be visible when you're configuring your control. And how can we do that? So we have strings folder with two regex files. For the demo, let's show you how you can easily add another one. So right click if you have PCF Builder add-on. Okay, I got a pop-up. I choose Africans. Why not? First one. And when you select the language, it will create a regex file for you, add it to the manifest. And here, as you can see, it's generated by the tool. It's really hard to analyze all the data here if you're not familiar with the regex, but at the bottom of the file, you will find data nodes. Data node has two values that matter. So it's name and value node. In value node, you actually you type your translation for that key. For example, control display name key. I have that here. Will be translated in English. Sorry, in that Afrikaans that we created now to the control name. So you need to add all the keys that you want to use in your control here, add the translations, and translate them to all the other languages. And you don't need to do anything. Your control will be translated for the configuration level. But if you want to use translations in your control itself, for example, I have here a simple text box control that makes your text red. I will show you that in a bit. And I want to have a localized placeholder text. How do I get that key? So you go to context, resources, get string, and input the key value here. What the code will do in the execution, it will search for that key in your regex file. So for example, fancy control here. And if there is value, it will display that value and use that value on our form. So we have text input placeholder key in our regex file. We just set a placeholder to our text box. And if we jump to our app, I created control for the text field, so I attached it to an account name. And as you can see, system in English now, and it says start typing. If I want to change my personalization settings and change the language, I can change the language to Croatian. Okay, and when I change the value to Croatian, my language, it will just reload, and the value for Croatian placeholder will be shown on the field. And how easy is that? Just by adding simple regex files, you can easily translate your control and make it available to broader audience. So that's for the regex part. Maybe I can just show you for the preview image. So preview image, you just input the preview image attribute here and path to that particular image, and you're good to go. You will have your preview image on the control. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so React and Office Fabric UI. Those are the two cool things that you should definitely consider using when creating PCF controls. Office Fabric is now, let's say, deprecated, and it will be replaced with a Fluent UI, which is basically the same thing at the moment. They're releasing both versions at the moment, but since the Fabric UI will be deprecated, Fluent UI will be the way to go. So why would you use React? There is a cool feature in React called Virtual DOM. Virtual DOM is basically a DOM that is rendering only the parts that are changed. So you don't need to re-render the whole DOM every time you want to change the value of something. It will just change the value that is changed, not re-render the whole DOM. And that's the biggest, the best feature of React, as I can see. And in future, Microsoft is tending to allow us to include our components in their virtual DOM of the app. So, for example, we can use the same React DOM that our model-driven apps are using. At the moment, we have like a small sandbox there that we need to include every single time our React, our Office Fabric, and that's really not cool. So I'm really looking forward when we can use the React Fabric UI straight from our model-driven apps. Learning React is a win-win situation for sure, because every control uh, in our model-driven apps is based on React. So you are using the tool like the Microsoft developers, like they are developing their controls with React. It just seems native integration there. Uh, let's go to Office Fabric part. That's Power Apps look and feel brought to you with that library. So you can see few controls here. For example, calendar, option sets, sliders, checkboxes. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, copy CSS files all around just to make the control uh, to have the same look and feel like your model-driven apps. Just use Office Fabric. It will save you a lot of time. That's for the external libraries. Framework APIs is another great topic because people are thinking that everything in the framework is handled by the framework, but that's not true. But framework exposes a lot of APIs to make you feel like you can do anything with your control. For example, the simplest example here is read-only mode. How can my control be read-only? If I lock the field via JavaScript on my form, if I don't make my control read-only by myself in the code, it will not be read-only. You need to handle stuff like that. So with a simple command, mode.control is disabled, you can get from the host application if the control is disabled and handle that in your code. Field level security also, if the user should see or edit the field and stuff like that, you need to handle that by yourself, because you're just putting a mask over the out-of-the-box control, and you need to handle those kind of things. It's a bit tricky for the complex controls because how can I disable a control that is huge, maybe the whole form control? Overlay is the best answer for that. So create just an overlay above your control, and it will just not be clickable anymore, and you should do the stuff you want after that. Explore the framework API. There are a lot of APIs that can help you when you're building your applications. For example, user settings. How the user wants to see numbers. Do they want to have decimal comma or decimal dot or stuff like that, date formatting. And you can easily make your control be aware of that user personalization settings that he set in his application, and you can easily use it in your control. There are tons of APIs. Go through the documentation and see what's there. There are really a tons of useful APIs that you can use. Now, the maybe most controversial part in this presentation, model apps and versus canvas apps. Why is that so? PCF is made for the model-driven apps. We were waiting for some kind of framework for a while, and canvas apps were not even a thing back in the days. So Microsoft developed the PCF component framework just for model-driven apps at start. And canvas app features are still behind the model-driven counterpart because of that. The priority is model-driven apps, and canvas apps is pushed a little bit down. Support for canvas app is still in a preview. That you must have that in mind, and it will be GA in March next year. So a lot of changes can be made until that GA point. So keep that in mind. Stuff can break if you use that in a preview, and you can invest a lot of time in canvas components, and it will maybe break after the GA part. They have totally different runtimes. For example, you want to use a data set and a field in the same control. You can't do that in a model-driven app because it is following some interfaces that you must follow. You can only use only fields or only a data set. You can mix those things. And in Canvas apps, you can use anything you want. You have inputs, outputs. Your Canvas app is basically like a function. It has some inputs and some outputs, and you are all on your own. You can do some crazy stuff with that you can't in a model-driven app because you're bound to those fields. Web API is the big part here. It's not available in Canvas apps. I hope it will be available in Canvas apps pretty soon, but still, if you are working, for example, on an app that on a control that uses Web API, and you want to make it for both model-driven and Canvas, you really need to develop a big Web API part in your control if you want to make it work in Canvas, and that's a huge thing. So you can't use the out-of-the-box Web API part. You will lose a lot of time to implement Web API just for your Canvas. So keep that in mind. In that case, I prefer to split the controls in the two. So one control version for Canvas and one for model-driven apps. And I maintain it one by another. So I need to make changes here. Okay, I need to change the other rep too, because in that way you will have them separated, and you don't need to think if you are working on a model-driven. Should it work? Should that work on the Canvas too? No, you are just testing that version for the model-driven app and another version for the Canvas. So if you are building a control for both Canvas and model-driven, split them up, and that's the way to go. Okay. So the debugging part, I think that's the most underestimated part here, because most of the people are using testing harness. Testing harness is cool. It's good for small controls, but when you try to implement complex logic, it's not a way to go to test your component. So you need to push your control to the organization, test it there, and that takes some time. If you are using async await patterns, it's hard to read the syntax when it's transferred and bundled with Webpack. So that's one point also against the harness. You can't use APIs. You need to mock all the data. You can't work with the real data, and that's there is the big problem there, because most of the cases are data related. So please keep that in mind. And how can we do it in a better way? How can I speed up my debugging process? As I said before, complex controls require more than a harness. You can test them in harness. It's really time consuming. If you make a change, okay, I need to redeploy it on my organization. That's not a way to do it. And how can we do it better? Using Fiddler's autoresponder function. Basically what that means, it will load up your local file, inject it to the browser when the page is loaded, and you're good to go. You just need to save your file, local file, edit it, and reload the page, and boom, you will have the latest version directly in your browser. It's maybe hard for a start, but it's a really huge productivity boost because you don't need to mock your data, uh, deploy it every hour maybe when you're doing the development. And also you can use source maps. Those are this is the feature of TypeScript that you can directly debug through your TypeScript files and not the bundled JS and translated JS that is created from your TypeScript. And if you have a complex control, imagine you have few files, like 10 files in TypeScript, and when it's bundled, it's one single file. It's using latest ES syntax. It will be just unreadable when you try to debug it. So when using source maps, you can debug through your TypeScript files and you are ready to go. And let's go to the demo part, and I will show you how can you use Fiddler to improve your workload. Okay, let's go here. First thing you need to do to prepare for Fiddler debugging is go to the tsconfig and add this line. So instruct the compiler, I will use source maps. Okay, when you're using source maps, when you build your component, in the output, in the output, you will see bundle.js.map file. That's the file that you need for the Fiddler debugging, because you will not push your bundle.js to your environment. You will have it just locally. And the second part you need to do is go to Node modules, scroll all the way down to PCF scripts, I think it's called. PCF scripts. When you find that, expand it and go to webpack config.js. Open that up and go to the part where it says OOB config and add this line here. So devtool equals source map. That will instruct our webpack that we will use source maps as our dev tool. And when we have that, we are ready to go. We build our component. So we make a change, build our component, and we are good to go. Okay, so now we have our bundle.js.map file, and we need to configure the Fiddler. Okay, so I will open the Fiddler. So in my presentation, it's the old image from the Fiddler Classic, but this is the new interface that I'm using now. And it's basically the same, but more prettier, in my opinion. You can see autoresponder here, tab. Turn that up and add new rule. So when you're adding a rule, you need to input what do I want to replace. So when the browser calls for bundle.js.map, I will inject this file. So you go and input here your local bundle.js.map file, and you're good to go. When you exit, the Fiddler is running. Make sure that you have those two light up in blue, and go to your browser. Okay, that's in creation, but never mind. Open your DevTools, and first of all, when you're using Fiddler, first thing you need to do is clear the cache, because it will not work. It will not load your local file if you are not clearing the cache. Okay, just make it that way. And now we want to search for our TypeScript files. If you can see in our project, I have two TypeScript files. index and text box helper. Okay, so if I try to search for it now when the fiddler is running, I can find it. Okay, I have that here. So I have my original TypeScript file that I can debug through. And if I go reveal in sidebar, I can see that here in the fancy text box control, I have my two files here and I can switch around them. Let's set a breakpoint somewhere. So when we are updating the view, so on line 27, we have a breakpoint. And now if I start to type something here, boom, the breakpoint will trigger and I will be able to debug through my original TS file. That's really amazing because the readability in TypeScript is so good, and you can easily navigate through your code. And you can go for bundle.js, and if you are using the production deployment, you will see that file that is like minified, uh, a bit obfuscated and stuff like that, and you can debug the control if you're probably in production with that kind of code. You need to use Fiddler in that kind of in that environment. So production environments, Fiddler is recommended for debugging. That's for sure, because you will have your TypeScript file for debugging, and you can debug it on the real data on the server. Okay, I think that's all for the debugging part. The key thing here, just add one rule and link it to your local file and you're ready to go. Okay, let's go back to the slides. Okay, so next part is performance. I was talking now about production deployment. So if you're using MS Build configuration release, you're creating the solution for the production environment that will be minified and stuff like that, to keep it low on size, because it will perform better. We don't want to load huge files on our actual production environments. And we come to two things here. There is something called microcontrols. That is like controls that you will bind on one field, for example, on a text field that will add a copy button on it. It has a simple logic. It will be used multiple times. So on one form, you will have, for example, 5 or 10 instances of that control. And you should not use any frameworks with those kind of controls. And why is that? Because if you use React, React will be loaded for every single control. So imagine if you have 10 fields with the same control on it, and you will load 10 times React. That's a huge performance issue, and you should really consider, maybe if I have those 10 fields every time and I need to use React because I have some complex logic there and I want to use React, then you should consider to make one huge control that will contain all those 10 text fields, that will have a complex logic, maybe act as a single page application even. And in that case, using framework is recommended, because in that case, you will load only one React, one Office Fabric or Fluent UI, and that's a huge performance boost. I had some issues with the controls that were made like microcontrols, but we're using heavy frameworks in the backend, and that's a really bad idea. And I had like load times at 30 seconds for a page, so keep that in mind when you are designing your controls at first time. Okay, and the last part is don't hack. or at least try not to hack, because as a developer, I'm the first one that will try to hack anything around the platform, the code. So I tried not to hack too much in the PCF world, because if you're using unsupported things, that's really bad and can make your life so even worse when the things break. So you have a control, you're using unsupported things, they push an update. They don't need to inform you that the update will break that because you're using unsupported things, and you have a really, really big problem. Depends on your code base, but you have a really big problem. You need to refactor everything and use some other stuff. Parameterize your inputs. I saw that people are using XRM page inside their PCF controls because you have access to the XRM page object from your control because you're on the form. You can use it, but it's not supported. If you need to input data inside your control, make that a parameter. Everything that needs to be in the control should enter only by the parameters. And you can think of PCF control like a function. There is an input and output, and function needs inputs to work. So everything that has to be in the control go straight through the outputs, and you're good to go. Use Web API because it's really good stuff there. You can do tons of actions through the Web API. Sadly, they didn't expose the Web API execute method, but we are using it. We don't say that loud, but most of the people are using Web API execute method because it's needed, and we don't have it exposed. But that's probably the only thing I hack in the PCF. So I use execute method, but I hope that will be supported in no time. Explore the framework docs because there are probably tons of features that you are not aware, and that's the way because you hack. You go to hack things because you don't know what is already there in the framework. So explore the framework docs and make yourself life easier. Uh, all the things can be made in the future. So there is an idea section in the Power Apps community. Post your ideas there. For example, Web API execute method is there as an idea. It's upvoted, I don't know how many times. And I'm sure that Microsoft guys are looking on those ideas when they are prioritizing the development of the features. It will definitely pay off in future because you will not have broken code. The PCF has a really great interface that will guide you on every step that, in the development. You just follow that interface, don't hack around, and you'll be really, really grateful for that in the future. That's my greatest advice. If you can avoid hacking, please avoid the hacking of your controls. Okay, let's check the time. Oh, 45. Perfect. Thank all the sponsors. That was end of my session. Thanks sponsors because you're supporting the online version of the conference too. Don't forget to be at the raffle just after the end of the session. And I hope you enjoyed, you learned something new, maybe, or improved your workload. And now there is a Q&A time.